The Crazy Lady is a scary horror story about a hunter who lives in a cabin, deep in the woods. One day, he comes across a beautiful young woman who may not be what she seems. Bob had been out in the woods all day, hunting for deer. When he got back to his little cabin, it was almost dark and he was shocked to find the front door was standing open. Cautiously, he crept into the cabin and was surprised to see a young lady standing in front of the fireplace. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a really pretty face and long brown hair that came down to her shoulders. She was wearing a white vest that was tied up over her stomach and a pair of blue jeans that accented her curves. The young lady said her name was Jessica and she was lost. She had come out to the woods to stay at her father's lodge, but had wandered off and couldn't find her way back. She said she had spent all day, wandering in the forest, trying to find help. Bob said that he would help her, but it was too late to go walking through the woods. She would have to stay the night in his cabin and in the morning, he would lead her back to her father's lodge. Jessica thanked him and offered to cook him dinner in return for his kindness. Over dinner, they talked for a while and Bob was glad to have company. He didn't meet many women, living alone as he did, in his little cabin in the woods. Eventually, Jessica started to get sleepy. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Bob told her she could take his bed and he would sleep in a chair. She climbed into bed, fully dressed, and before long, was sleeping soundly. She looked like she needed the rest. Bob watched her as she slept. He thought she was one of the most gorgeous girls he had ever seen. He wondered if she could fall in love with a man like him. She was the kind of woman he had longed for all his life. Young, brown-haired and beautiful. As Jessica slept on the bed, he sat in a chair, listening to music on the radio. He kept the volume low so that he wouldn't wake Jessica. Then, just as he was dozing off, the music on the radio was interrupted by a local news broadcast. The reporter said that the police were combing the area in search of a prisoner who had escaped from the state hospital for the criminally insane. Bob's ears pricked up. The reporter said that the woman who had escaped was armed and dangerous. She had been convicted of the grisly murders of her husband and 4 other men and was sent to prison. Psychologists who examined her declared her mentally ill, and she was transferred to the state hospital for the criminally insane. However, as she was being transported, she managed to overpower her guards, using a knife she had stolen from the prison cafeteria. She stabbed them to death and escaped into the woods. The police had been searching for her all day. On the radio, they gave a description of the crazy lady. She was 5'4", 26 years old, brunette and very attractive. She had been wearing a prison uniform when she escaped, but they said she would probably try to steal some clothes to disguise herself. The police warned people to be on the lookout for the crazy lady and advised anyone who came across her to keep their distance. Bob's blood froze as he looked at Jessica, lying there peacefully on his bed. She fit the description perfectly. Young, brunette, beautiful and completely insane. She was the escaped maniac the police were looking for. He was sure of it. And he was sure of something else too. She was planning to kill him while he slept. He wasn't going to let that happen. He knew what he had to do. Suddenly, Bob jumped out of his chair and threw open the front door of the cabin. Jessica awoke with a fright and looked at him, a confused expression on her face. He grabbed her by the hair, pulling her out of bed and began dragging her towards the door. She started screaming and her arms flailed wildly, trying to catch hold of him. He managed to wrestle her to the front door, then with a mighty heave, he threw her out into the darkness. She landed on the grass outside and immediately jumped up and came running back towards the door. Bob slammed the wooden door shut and had just enough time to lock and bolt it before she slammed into it. He braced himself against the door, expecting her to break it down at any moment. He could hear her outside, pounding on the cabin door with her fists, kicking it with her boots and shouting at him to let her in. And then he heard a scream, an ear-splitting shriek that made him shiver. It sounded like the howls of a crazed animal. The kind of sound that could only be made by a person who was completely insane. Then there was a horrible silence. He could hear something shifting and moving about outside the wooden door. He was shaking with fear, ready for anything. After a while, he noticed a thin trickle of blood coming under the door. Soon, it turned into a pool of blood, flowing across the floor at his feet. Gathering his wits about him, Bob slowly opened the front door and was horrified by what he found. Jessica was lying there in a pool of blood and a large knife was sticking out of her head. She was completely naked and her eyes were glazed over. His mind raced as he tried to understand the strange scene that lay before him. But, stranger still, was the neat pile of blue clothing which was sitting on the grass beside Jessica's dead body. Reaching over her naked corpse, he picked up the blue clothes and, turning them over in his hands, he realized it was a blue uniform. There was some black lettering printed on the back. It read, "State Hospital for the Criminally Insane." He fell to his knees beside the dead girl's body as he finally understood what had happened. The crazy lady had murdered Jessica for her clothes.